Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. So first off, a lot of clients of ours are joining, so thank you so much. We put this webinar mainly to enhance our clients' capabilities, share things that are happening in the market, and help you be more productive with your technology stack. As everybody knows, Ridge IT is a cybersecurity company, so we always walk forward with an idea of protecting ourselves first. So this is a co-webinar between Microsoft and us. It's going to last about 45 minutes. We're going to leave some time for Q&A at the end. As we're talking, you'll see on the bottom of your bar, you should have a Q&A little tab that you can click on. When you have questions during the webinar, just start typing it in the Q&A. At the end, we're going to get to as many of them as possible. And I'll go to the introductions here of who's going to be presenting. So most of you who are clients, you know me or of me. I'm Perry Schumacher. I'm the CSO here at Ridge IT. My job is to make sure that you guys are taken care of and we at Ridge are doing the right thing by you as a client. And then we have Doak, who is from Microsoft. His thing is AI. He's a Copilot master, and I'm going to stop there and let him finish his own introduction.
Awesome. Thanks, Perry. As Perry mentioned, my name is Doak Moore. I'm a senior cloud solution architect. I've got a long tenure here at Microsoft. Over about the last 2 years, I've been focusing on all AI, Copilot, all of the above. And then, as we get into data readiness, security, compliance, those areas too. As Perry mentioned, we will keep it. I'm going to keep it at a high level, as Perry mentioned also, because it is a huge topic. Data governance, data security as it relates to Copilot is a big umbrella. There's quite a few slides. We'll keep it, try to have some Q&A sessions for sure. The agenda is what we're going to be looking at is really preparing for Copilot. We'll look at, real quickly, some user context, information risk around secure sharing and collaboration, how you can restrict Copilot from data, data classification protection. A lot of these areas you may be familiar with, you may not. This really depends on, your context as it relates to Microsoft Stack and Purview. So Microsoft Purview, those areas, SharePoint, Advanced Management, what we'll talk about, labeling documents, labeling group sites, integration, some DLP. We'll wrap up with that. And, but at the end of the day, data readiness for Copilot is really important. Preparing for Copilot for customers, we've listened to our customers. So if I were to rewind a little bit, going back to 24 months ago when we released Copilot, kind of the first iteration of it, and we had some early adopter programs. A lot of our customers their data was not secure. So there was a lot of misconception that Copilot was giving their end users elevated permissions to data, internal data. That's not the case. Copilot inherits all of Microsoft 365 data readiness, data security, compliance, all of that. So files that are on SharePoint, files that are on OneDrive, those areas, most customers were probably not governed correctly. So there was this big misconception that Copilot was granting them access, elevated access. We have done a lot of work over the last 2 years, really over the last year, 12 months in that area to really bring capabilities around SharePoint, around Purview for these types of compliance concerns and giving back reporting structure to our customers to say, okay, this is where we're currently at, maybe before we implement Copilot, or we want to restrict stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So around secure sharing, collaboration, some of the management and governance, auditing, classification, those types of areas. So real quick, around user context. So all of you are probably familiar with AI. You're familiar with the terminology Microsoft 365 Copilot, what it can do around creativity and skills, unlocking that productivity, what AI can essentially do for you, whether it's us, whether it's another entity, third-party entity that's using for AI. Really unlocking creativity, efficiency is a word I use a lot. So making your customers, your end users more efficient, summarizing those areas. So again, just this is a quick look at, what is AI, what you can do with it, up-leveling on skills, those things, those types of things. So really the advantages around that. It's going to increase end users' ability to access that type of information, internal information. And what we find is that those controls over that information, they need to increase because they were never really garnered or looked at previously. A lot of our customers have already had these capabilities that they're paying for, whether it be an E5 type license, a stack on top of Purview, but they never really understood them or never really took advantage of the capabilities. Well, now the dawn of AI and the dawn of data, this is where it really comes up in question. So accessing that information, creating and distributing information, what are those risks? What are the types of risks? And that's where Purview is going to come into play to mitigate a lot of that. Purview, and then you'll hear me talk about SharePoint Advanced Management, or SAM. I'll use the acronym SAM. So when we talk about those security scenarios, as I mentioned, permissions, having access to data within the organization that you could otherwise already view. Most of the customers that I work with, they didn't previously have a concept that data that resides up in SharePoint Online in OneDrive, it may already be open to the organization. The end users just weren't aware that they could go in and perform a search, a manual search, to find that information, depending on if they're on the SharePoint side, maybe they're on their OneDrive on web client, maybe they're anywhere and they're just searching. That could potentially populate that information for them. So Copilot now makes it a little easier to find that information because you're typing in a conversational piece and referencing documents, and they may have access to these documents that they otherwise didn't know they had access to. So this is where those tools that we're talking about, SharePoint Online, OneDrive permissions, and some of those scenarios that we look at, permissions that are on a site that become messy over time, a site that's been around for a long time, it has a document library, sensitive data that gets stored across different locations. They're going to have varying permissions on those locations. The content owners, they really don't understand the locations and how permissions should be configured or set up. There's no governance set by the organization, and then controls are not in place to protect that sensitive data. So let me give you an example of what this would look like. So here you can see we have like a SharePoint site. Site owner limits site access to certain users, but creates a public library to share certain docs with everyone except external users. So what we see is that content creator isn't really aware of the library permissions, the document library permissions, and adds some sort of sensitive file to that library. What happens is the user who doesn't have access to the site is searching for that document. Again, searching, they could be using just Microsoft Search, or in Copilot AI now, they're using AI to type in a prompt, and for whatever reason, they're able to reference this document because the name of the document has some sort of context. That name of the document that they're using, they're typing that in. So then Copilot's going to return that data from that list that may be a sensitive file in the prompt response because it's not labeled properly. So this is what we would see as a potential security risk. So without that proper SharePoint permissioning that I mentioned, or any type of additional protection, that data, that file, Word doc, Excel document, financials, could be exposed. Now, again, it wasn't Copilot's fault that it got exposed. It was just the ability because of the indexing of the file. It has been indexed behind the scenes because the end user has permissions to it without them knowingly having permissions to it. So how do we remediate that? So we're going to look, this is where you're going to look at reviewing those results. There's several ways to approach it, to securing data. The org could decide to block use of everyone except external, or they could apply, certain container sensitivity labels to prevent data. If the library is shared with everyone, a DLP policy could be used to block access to the files of certain file types of sensitive data. With those sensitivity labels, the control can be applied to both deny and allow access to file based on users who's trying to access it. So this is where it really comes down to setting up those controls, maybe prior to rolling out AI or Copilot to the masses. And that's where you would see those labeling is going to get displayed when that document is inputted, say in that search query, or I should say in that prompt within Copilot. If it's labeled properly, Copilot inherits that. Copilot will return the file in the prompt response, and letting the end user know, maybe you don't have access to it, or if you do have access to it, it is still labeled as sensitive information, how it's classified. So over into user context and information risk, just really around the permissioning model. This is an important one. So what information can typical 365 users access? So all of our SaaS workloads, Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, those are the three main ones. As a 365 user, you're going to be using Teams chats, files, you're going to be in SharePoint, and Teams sites that you have a document repository. Your OneDrive is essentially just a SharePoint Online personal site. that you could open up permissions on also, depending on how it's set up. And then Exchange, all of your emails, all of your meetings, your address book, delegated permissions to other mailboxes. Think of that as permissioning model. It's permission to the Microsoft user. OneDrive also, as I mentioned, and then Enter ID, information around the Outlook gal, around People Picker, profile cards. Copilot has access to, again, that information if it's enabled for the user. The key points are this, is that Teams, Exchange, these are really going to be, you don't have to really manage the permissions on that. It's really around the SharePoint OneDrive type space when we start talking about labeling of documents, purview, and SharePoint events management on sites. So again, another permission model here around the service boundary. So this one, a lot of going on in this one. What I'm going to pull it up here. So what you're seeing here, our service boundary. So think of that as your boundary for your tenant. There on the top left, you have your user level semantic index. That's part of the Copilot experience. You'll hear the terminology semantic index, graph API, the graph. Who was my last email from? This may be something that you type into Copilot. It's only going to access your email. Tell me about a topic. The results are going to get trimmed only to the user accessible to that. So as I mentioned, it's really just around how in this middle section around these files, searching for files, how those permissions are actually configured and set up. Any request that you make to Copilot is going to honor the user's context. Now, again, that context may be more expanded out that they're aware of. So that's where this is important around permissioning and labeling. So really the three main things around AI tools and some of the security concerns are leaking data into AI. They inadvertently leak sensitive data into Copilot. I'm referencing an Excel document that has some internal financials that I may or may not, maybe I shouldn't have had access to that, or maybe I do have access to it, but it should not have been used as a reference in Copilot experience. Leaking data outside of AI. I'm creating a Word document, I'm creating an Excel document, a PowerPoint deck, and that content that's generated by Copilot has some sensitive information in it. And then oversharing. That's kind of the big one, distributing generated items that contain that sensitive information. Oversharing is, again, permissions not set up correctly. So what type of tools are available to you? What do we have available to help alleviate those concerns? Tenant securing, sharing configuration, that's where SharePoint Events Management comes into play. So this is a newer type of capability we introduced probably about 10 months, 12 months ago. If you have a Copilot license, it is free. It is free to use. It is an add-on if you don't have it. So again, you don't have to have Copilot to take advantage of SharePoint Advanced Management, but it is an add-on type of capability that you can use. This is great because it's going to give you lots of great telemetry around sites, over permissioning of sites, and the tools that you can run to help alleviate that. Some of the information identification models around purview and the sensitivity label based on controls, and then DOP, those DOP methods. And all of these are going to reside really under the purview stack, whereas the SAM is its own entity that's going to be a SharePoint Advanced Management. As I mentioned early on, we listen to our customers. We really did a lot of work over the last 12, 18 months in these areas because we found out that our customers were not governing their data properly. So there was a lot of pausing on Copilot, a lot of pausing on rolling it out because of this area. So we introduced some tools, telemetry, to help our customers with that. So content sharing, what is the risk? Preventing that oversharing, accidental sharing and control, SAM, SharePoint Advanced Management, you heard that a lot. It can help identify that information. It can help identify sites that are currently overshared or have that sensitive content on them that would potentially expose that sensitive information. Overall, the goal really is to reduce those compliance issues. Audit failures, data breaches, all of those areas of concerns of customers in today's time. You want to prevent oversharing. You want to apply content access controls by using our current tool sets that you do have available in SharePoint to the SharePoint admins and those site owners to prevent that oversharing areas. So really, what is that risk? when users are going to share documents, when they place documents up in SharePoint and folders without any proper type of restrictions, because most end users don't really have the concept or grasp, permissioning in a SharePoint site, a team site that is essentially a SharePoint online site behind the scenes. They're going to inadvertently grant access to individuals that necessarily don't have permissions or should have permissions to a potential document. That can expose that information. It can cause data breaches, compliance areas, audit failures, you name it. One of those primary risks is around oversharing in SharePoint Online. We see it quite often. So that's where SAM, SharePoint Advanced Management, is going to come into play to help determine with those types of oversharing problems that currently exist. Also, regulatory violations. Oversharing is a big one that can lead to non-compliance and industry-type government regulations if you have to abide by different laws, depending on the country, depending on the industry that you're in. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. That's something that's important. So we see organizations that handle personal data that have to comply with GDPR in Europe or California Consumer Acts, things like that. If you don't comply with those regulations due to oversharing, there's going to be some serious legal, financial type repercussions that occur. SharePoint Data Access Governance reports, DAG reports, if you're not familiar with them, they can identify sites that are currently overshared or have sensitive content on them. Think of it as bringing that visibility into sites. It's going to prevent oversharing, managing access to it. It leads to more efficient and secure use of Copilot across the organization. Again, I keep hitting on this. Copilot's not giving you access to that information. It's already there. And these types of solutions that we have with SharePoint and Purview that we'll talk about, that gives you insight to that, gives you the reporting capabilities that these can be run. Again, these could be reports that are run weekly. They could be run bi-weekly. They could be run multiple times a week, especially in the beginning stages of adopting a Copilot. These are the types of areas you really want to nail down. We want to get a good holistic view of our environment. What is our environment set up? What are sensitivity labels that we have? Do we have any? What are the sharing capabilities, label or sharing permissions that are currently out there? But organizations that have already like a zero trust mindset, you can apply this restricted access control, RAC, to all sites and adjust those permissions as needed. There's pros and cons to that. Definitely the pro is that if you have a lot of sites, a lot of SharePoint sites, that actually can help you quickly secure those sites. The drawback or the con of that would be, it can also cause disruptions to users that, so you need to communicate that at the end of the day. But it is a way to control that. You can control that RAC policies if you want to restrict that, but you do want to communicate that out. There's also change history reports that you can identify changes to sites, properties that could lead to that oversharing. So restricting M365 Copilot. Advantages versus disadvantages. So restricting it, there's definitely going to be some advantages. It's lowering the information risk. This is something that a lot of customers are doing early on, maybe their POC. So the first 30 days, it's going to really lock down sensitive information. So it won't be disclosed through the search or Copilot generated type content. So I'm in Copilot, I'm searching, I'm typing in a prompt. I don't have to worry about sensitive information popping up. But again, there are some disadvantages to that. It's going to hinder the end user's benefits of Copilot when working around or using information just in general. So again, it is important to educate that user base. It is really just a temporary measure, like we point out at the bottom. Restricting Copilot is temporary. It should get to a point, and it may be 60 days, it may be 90 days, who knows? But you want to get to a point where it can be opened up. Will open up a little more after data has been correctly labeled, been reviewed. So the solution here is, as I was talking about, restricting Copilot temporarily using one of the methods, SharePoint search indexing method. And the big one here is the second bullet, restricted SharePoint search. This is something we've just recently introduced as it relates to Copilot, because we wanted to go in and say, okay, we're going to restrict SharePoint search across the board. So all of our sites, or only these potential sites, are going to be indexed. So only those sites, so Copilot would only have access to those potential sites. All of the other sites in our environment are restricted. They're not being indexed currently by Copilot. We have content discovery, we have restricted access controls, all that good stuff. So this is what it would look like. RSS, restricted SharePoint search. It is that temporary solution. You want to take time to review and audit the site permissions. It is designed for our customers that are concerned about unintentional oversharing of content. It does disable organizational-wide search. While allowing you to select up to 100 sites that you trust. So we do have, some leeway there on sites. A lot of customers may not even have 100 sites in their environment. Maybe some customers have 100,000 sites. But it gives you that ability to really disable it org-wide, but allow it through to potential POCs. And when it's enabled, the experiences that you're going to see org-wide, it's limited to a select of those SharePoint sites as well as individual users, files, and content. So enabling RSS or this restricted search doesn't lock down, say, their OneDrive. That's a different type of solution. This is really just the SharePoint search that can be indexed. And this is what you would see there at the top. So what you're looking at is the Copilot chat app, whether you're on the web, this is a screenshot from the web, or whether you're in Teams, same type of experience. But we can see that the organization admin has restricted Copilot from accessing certain sites, and that's going to limit that content that can be indexed by Copilot. So on the RSS here, restricted method, what you see here is similar to the screenshot we saw previously. We have our user level and semantic index there, recent files, whether it's your emails, your meetings, Word documents that you can see that Copilot can access there at the bottom. But we have these sites over on the right-hand side that are being restricted. So even though you're restricting SharePoint search or Copilot, we'll call it search, Copilot interactions with certain SharePoint Online sites, that user still has the capability to leverage and use their own internal, or I should say OneDrive type Word files, Excel files, and then emails, Teams chats, things like that. So you can get granular with this. You can get to where it's granular on the permissioning on the sites and what you can restrict. This was something that we got feedback early on from our customers that it was, it's just either all or nothing. So we did a lot of work here, as I mentioned. On the controlling, this is on the site settings. So that SharePoint search indexing, while restricted search is going to limit those interactions, you can also remove that actual site from indexing itself. So it's not even indexed by Microsoft Search. So if it's not indexed by Search, Copilot's not going to be able to interact with it. And then on SAM, so this is the big one, SharePoint Advanced Management. Been around for about, I would say 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, hard to say. But as I mentioned, it is an add-on unless you have a Copilot license. If you have a Copilot license, you can, as an admin, you can then go in there and configure all of this different telemetry that's at your fingertips, identifying these high-risk user oversharing sites that you can then use the restricted site search. You can use those DAG reports to comply with different targeted sites. You can limit the ability of end users to search for files, preventing sites from surfacing in the organization. But it is a NAS capability that was recently introduced that you do have to help garner that data governance, data security. So classification and protection. So really the overview, sensitivity labels, group sites interaction, that's a big one, and then the label encryption. As I mentioned, I'm kicking these at a high level. We're not going to go deep into these. We don't have enough time, but I do want to, from a high level, look at this. So some of the concepts here around management, understanding what data you have in your environment, identifying important data across the hybrid environment if you have that, protecting that data, applying these flexible type actions, whether it's restriction, encryptions, and visual markings. You want to prevent the oversharing. You want to prevent that sensitive information from getting out. So know what things are so that you can make those decisions. And that's where this telemetry around SAM, around Purview, there's compliance reports that we've built into Microsoft Purview now that you can pull that information from the environment. So think of this as another example here that we would have in Purview scenario. So we have our source item, let's say an Excel document, a workbook. It's up in OneDrive that you can see. And we have Copilot that we're going to say, please summarize this item in an email. So we're in Outlook and we're using Copilot in Outlook. So you can see both of these are personal information. Not a big deal. You would think, okay, it's labeled properly. Maybe there's something in that Excel document. So identifying that information. What is that information? Knowing what it is. Does it contain PII information? Does it contain credit card information? Full names, physical addresses, all of the different areas that you may have to comply with. using DLP to warn that user. So this is where DLP comes into play, that you're probably familiar with, that is going to pop and tell that end user when they're leveraging and using it in Copilot. It will give them that, I'll call it a mail tip. It's similar to like a mail tip. It'll give them that informational bar, informational tip, if it's labeled properly with DLP, to warn the end user. So what are those classification methods? To split into two categories. So we on the left, we talk about content-based classification. It's going to look at information that's contained within the item. We're going to look for different keywords and patterns. You can have trainable classifiers, exact data matches, fingerprints that are in the document, different information types. And then on the right, you can see that we have context-based classification. It's going to look at information contained within the item. But the methods that we look at, again, around sensitivity label, retention labels, document properties, any of the metadata that's part of that document, we're going to search for that. We're going to look at that. So just a quick overview of what this would look like. So you can see we have a Word doc here. It's been labeled general. You can set up all of your personal, internal type. We have out-of-the-box labeling capabilities that are there, but this can be configured as needed within the organization. This will pop on that, setting that to what it may, again, whatever it may be, and then Copilot will adhere to that, depending on how that sensitivity label. And this could be auto labeling. This is what a lot of customers are doing now. They're setting it up to where it's labeling documents. We have that internally, so it's all of our documents, PowerPoints, Excel documents, confidential, things like that. So then Copilot adheres to that. So these considerations, this is around the M365 apps service channel. So you'll hear, current channel, monthly enterprise channel, semi-annual channel. One real quick takeaway on this is that Copilot is only supported in current channel and monthly enterprise channel as of now. There's no talk to have Copilot available in, say, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint in the semi-annual channel of the 365 apps. But there's going to be like a Copilot chat experience that's coming. So if your organization opts for a slower release channel, and you require a new feature, it may not be available in that channel. You would have to use the web apps. And then this outlines the capability for, say, labeling capabilities for DLP. As long as you're at like 2209, 2208, which is from 2022, over 3 years ago, then you should be fine. So most customers are. But again, the real takeaway is going to be the top two channels as it relates to really labeling considerations and just Copilot in general. So some more considerations, as I mentioned, semi-annual is not supported. You don't want to make sure you're on current channel or monthly enterprise channel. Some of the labeling taxonomy. So on the left there, you can see an example of sublabels that we use here internally. We have public, general, confidential. Then we have our Microsoft Extended FTE, recipients only, and it gives you a little breakdown of what those are. On the right would be some sublabels used in different customers' common scenarios that they may have, depending on what they're doing. Confidential, medical, internal guest, what those relate to, if you have to abide by HIPAA standards. And then the inheritance of that, what that would look like. So Copilot generated items are going to inherit sensitivity label information that are applied to the reference items. So you can see in this diagram, let me just get through all of it. We have referenced items. So what this means is that I am referencing an Excel document, an email, and a Word document in my Copilot prompt. So whether I'm in Outlook, whether I'm in the Copilot chat app, and I'm referencing multiple documents, one could be unclassified, one could be confidential, one could be restricted. I want to summarize. The prompt is something as simple as please summarize the information in these documents, and then I reference those documents via / with a plus symbol. If those have labelings applied to them, that label is going to come with that. So it's going to include the label-based DLP as well as any other controls that's on that. Another big area here is around group sites. So containerizing those concepts. Do take a note there on the right-hand side. PowerShell is required to enable this, to assign those sensitivity labels to your groups. But this is a way to define the scope on there that you can apply directly to files, emails, meetings, that containers on those SharePoint sites, team sites, Fabric BI, Power BI, so forth. You can see there the items, group sites. So this is another newer capability that we've introduced here over the last, again, I think 8 months. And then what that would look like as we talk about on containerizing that. So you're labeling a location. Say you want to label a SharePoint site. And at the end of the day, end users are going to say, well, we have a team site. Well, at the end, and that is a SharePoint site behind the scenes. But it's going to define that sensitivity of the items that should exist there. So that's where that comes into play, because that's important for Copilot. Because depending on how that is set up, is going to determine how Copilot has access to that. So we have highly confidential, it's restricted to internal only, location set to private, no guest access. You have general, sharing permitted externally, location set to public, guest permitted. If you move that over, what you're going to see is that's where those malicious outsiders. So the takeaway really is around that allows you to apply container specific controls on that site. And then the user notifications are going to help your end users to keep those items in those safe locations. There's going to be some notifications that they would actually see on that. Items moved outside of the safe locations are still going to be protected by DOP. So I take a Word document, I move it outside of that site location, it's still protected, meaning Copilot wouldn't have access to it if it's labeled properly. So another important here on the usage due to that inheritance that you see, because there's our 3 same reference files, a Word document, email, Excel document. And you can see there the highly confidential. So that sensitivity is going to inherit that. You're going to get that. So you can see what that would look like. So think of this as the file you recently uploaded or changed has that label that is higher than the label of the site, telling that you need to move the file to a different site, change the label if it's incorrect, or contact that site owner. So think of that as that notification type experience for your end users, that they would get notified of that. Moving into more labeling encryption. So Copilot's going to act with that user's context, as I've already mentioned. If a user doesn't have the extract permissions, is what we call it, on an item, they're not going to be able to, semantic index is not going to be able to leverage it and use it. When I say semantic index, think of that as graph, the user's context or graph. Semantic index, Microsoft search, just depending on what the terminology. The view and edit rights are going to enable that user access. So not providing extract permissions is going to prevent semantic index from even having the ability to view that file. And then we get into RMS. So rights management services and what that looks like. A user creates an item and adds a label to it, an Excel document. If the label has RMS configured, that item is encrypted. So a little different than like labeling. If the item is passed to another user, it's going to remain encrypted during that transit. So when a user accesses that or attempts to access that file, they must authenticate via Enter ID, conditional access policies within it apply to that user during authentication. And then if they are authorized, it's going to be granted. The user can then use that item in line with allocated permissions. But again, think of that as like an Excel document. In this case is what we're looking at. Permissions can restrict that action depending on what it may be. You may have copying and pasting, printing turned off. All of that's going to apply. But again, that's where Copilot comes into play, depending on if they're typing in their prompt and they're able to pull that file up. So really, why RMS? A couple of scenarios here: file on a USB key that's accidentally left on a bus. That's going to encrypt that. Sensitivity emails and email attachments that are sent across the internet. RMS allows you to actually strengthen that security. Some of the sensitive material that may be printed so that paper copies can be pulled out. You're applying those restrictions and preventing those users from doing that. So that's where Copilot and that rights management services can restrict those file interactions. So again, kind of the same concept we have earlier, but now we're seeing it from a personal type standpoint. Instead of over here on the right-hand side where we were accessing, say, documents on a SharePoint Online site, now we're looking at it from a user context. Recent emails, files. This is locked down via RMS. Copilot's not going to have access to that. You're blocking that extract permission. And then you also have, again, where we had the restriction of those SharePoint sites there, blocking that also. All right. On DOP, So again, purview, let me back up there real quick. So on our purview scenario, so an example here would be your prompt would be something like, please summarize this item in an email. We have the Excel document, it's your personal information. You have a couple of mitigations here. So knowing the data, as we talked about, identifying the information, using DLP to warn the end user, what would that warning look like if you haven't ever seen DLP policies through purview? Popping that, again, policy tip, informational bar, mail tip, whatever you want to call it, at the top of that email. We're trying to insert a document that contains that information, so be careful about the distribution. And then what Copilot in that scenario, auto labeling and purview scenario. So you can see that identifying that information. We want to summarize this item in that email, being able to do that, allowing that, recommending that sensitivity label during that process. What would that look like? So you can see here it says your organization recommends that you change the sensitivity to protected, and then it gives that end user that ability to change sensitivity or dismiss that. Now, this is not necessarily an auto labeling type feature. It's not going to label it automatically. It gives the end user to change, I should say, change that sensitivity for that. You can see at the bottom, though, auto labeling is going to require an E5 licensing or an E3 add-on licensing for those auto labeling capabilities. And then using DLP to prevent that distribution. So that's a little different there where that would come up, that policy tip. So you can see the sensitivity is protected and it's telling the end user, the recipient of the email is from an organization that's not been configured and it's giving them that call out. And then there is a block. That message includes one or more recipients. So it really comes down to the DLP, depending on how DLP is configured. There's different approaches. It's really up to our customers, the organization, what approach you take on securing that through DLP in those different scenarios as it relates to Copilot. So another one here, outbound email. Layer 1, you can see like a policy tip to caution. Layer 2 is auto labeling recommendation. Layer 3 is policy preventing distribution, and then label 4 on preventing that distribution for personal information. So we have confidential items and then personal information that we're preventing. So again, endpoint DLP, Defender for cloud apps, insider risk management, all kind of components of purview except the Defender. So Defender is going to be its own entity outside of that as we talk about just overall security, purview capabilities with that. All right. I got through that a lot faster than I thought, Barry. I know we got about, what, 15, 18 minutes? I don't know what type of Q&A questions. As I mentioned, very high level. This was really high level. Went through it pretty quick. I could spend hours talking about just the purview DLP policies.
Yeah, we're worried about maybe getting too far into the weeds on this call, but those who attend, a lot of you that are clients of ours, you work in financial institutions, you work in insurance agencies. Some of you are in healthcare. The the part that really is the takeaway here, we all know that inside security, we're going to be dragged down the road of AI whether we like it or not. This is not an option for us. It's a matter of time. It's a when, not an if. And so most of us have come to the realization that this is happening.
Yeah.
So now that we know that it's happening, the question starts to become, how do I secure it? And I think one thing that Doak highlighted that I really want, like, as a key takeaway here, is that when you're using AI inside of your organization, data hygiene becomes very important. So a lot of us, we have government-based customers that have CMMC requirements with CUI, and those of you who have HIPAA requirements are somewhat familiar with data hygiene and what needs to be used as far as Microsoft and external tools to be able to protect your data. When we bring in something like Copilot into an organization, there should be some level of thought that's given to our data hygiene and making sure that that is structured correctly during the deployment or shortly after the deployment, And I think Doak made a really good point where he's like, at first a lot of these guys are going with extremely restrictive access, and then eventually it has to go away. And that I think that's a proper way of thinking about it because it's AI to us and Copilot and implementing this is new. There's not a lot of people who really know how to do this well and protect your data as you're rolling it out. Some people are just buying Copilot license and hoping for the best at the end, and their security people are not sleeping at night.
Yeah.
Um, so for those of you at this call, if as you're going through with Copilot, and you're thinking about the adoption of AI inside of your organization, one thing to help you present to the executives, and hopefully that you're taking away with this for the leadership that wants the efficiency and efficacy of AI, they're pushing you. Like I want my employee to be 1.25 as efficient, 1.5 as efficient as they currently are. And AI is going to help us meet this business objective. As the security person, we need to make sure that they're moving with purpose and understand that, okay, cool, let's get the 1.25, 1.5 business efficiency per employee that we're looking for by adopting Copilot and AI into our organization. But as we do it, let's walk with our eyes open and understand that prior to us being able to capitalize on this, it would be better practice for us to take a look at our data hygiene, start implementing this, understanding the risks, mitigating it, and slowly loosening it up as we go, so we don't just inherit this huge risk. So we get the 1.25 to 1.5 right away, but now our data is exfilling, employees are quitting, and they're taking data with them that can be summarized. So all these risks are there with no real control in a lot of organizations. Let's start controlling that risk at the beginning of the adoption of Copilot, slowly expand it and loosening up as we go and as we have better and better data hygiene inside the organization. And so I think that's one of the themes, as you can see, is everything that Doak was talking about. That's kind of the theme throughout the details of what he was saying. And I
Yeah,
think
you brought up something very, very important. It's not if AI or Copilot's coming, it's when.
yeah, and we need to make sure that we're doing that. And so we've got a couple of questions here. Can Copilot leak data into the model or generate something sensitive by accident?
I think that if I understand the question, it is Copilot training on your data? If I understand the question, no, it's not training on your data. Could it leak information into the model? No, not in that sense. And think of Copilot. Think of all of our customers that have Copilot license. They have their own instance of that AI. They have their own LLM. So Copilot's really made up of three components: the LLM, large language model, the semantic index, you'll hear it referenced, and then Microsoft Graph. And Graph is what brings it all together. Graph is what brings emails, meetings, SharePoint Online, Teams, all of that stuff, OneDrive, because all the APIs are there. You're in our stack, but it stays your instance or the customer's instance of Copilot or the LLM is their instance. It's not like it's shared. Customer A LLM is shared with customer B LLM. No, yeah. So it stays in your instance, but it's not used to train.
Okay, and we've got a couple of questions, so we'll keep on going through them. We got 15 minutes, so we actually might hit all the questions.
Yeah.
Um, what's the safest way to roll out Copilot to multiple teams without rushing it? What would that look like?
Yeah, I would say the main thing I would, depending on the teams, the type of teams that you're using, we call them personas or lines of business. You'll hear it referenced as personas. So what's this, marketing or sales or IT or executives. Targeting, what we see is targeting. Don't target the IT infrastructure when you're leveraging or want to roll out Copilot. I saw a lot of that early on with our customers. Like, well, we bought 100 Copilot license and we distributed 50 of those to our IT staff. I mean, IT people are going to use Copilot a lot different than, say, sales or marketing. The main thing is now that we have SAM, SharePoint Advanced Management, as you think about start that POC, rolling those out, really getting in front of the data classification, data governance, as we were mentioning. It's important because you really want to take a health check of the environment as it relates to that security, because it is important. You don't want to just give Copilot out to everyone and then now they can go in and type in those prompts and get access to data. So really getting in front of it with Purview and really SharePoint Advanced Management. That's the easiest route, looking at those site permissions.
And and Federico gave me a great question. Perry, this seems really complicated. Can you guys do it? Yes, 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 Federico. We take cash, check, and credit card. So, so great question, Federico. That's why I like you, bud. Um, but no, he has a really good question. Follow, yes, for smaller companies, absolutely, we can step you through it. And one of the things to understand about Ridge is that so we do a lot of DoD work. We do a lot of highly classified confidential work. So we're very, very familiar with the permission systems as far as data governance inside of Microsoft. And because Copilot is kind of built to inherit those permissions, it made us uniquely positioned to be able to provide those type of services because we already had the foundational knowledge on how to be able to approach it. So absolutely, can we help you with that? Yes. The answer is absolutely yes, and we can help you quite a bit. The second question he has is, everything here seems to be tailored to Copilot, but what about companies using Azure Foundry or building AI solutions with other models other than Copilot? Will Microsoft Purview and DLP policies still apply on those scenarios? After all, this approach also relies on Microsoft Graph.
Yeah, great question. And yes, absolutely. That's the great thing about being in that Microsoft workload or boundary, we'll call it, our stack. Whether you're in Azure building with Azure Foundry, Fabric, whatever you're building with, you're building out your own LLMs. Yes, Purview is a part of that. All of the classifications, labeling, all those potential areas that you have, say with just a Microsoft 365 license Copilot, you're going to have with those broader components in Azure. Absolutely, you will have those ability.
Yeah, and just responding to you real quick, Federico, and then we'll get to your question, Steve. Yeah, I mean that's why. So in CMMC land, for DIB contractors, yeah, it is very difficult to configure Purview, to configure SharePoint. Um, there's Federico, the other company you guys met in InfoSec world when we were there, but they went through some complexities with Purview also. So it's not like going through and doing data governance is an easy task, right? It
Yeah,
requires a skill set, and it's not just a skill set on what widgets to move, but you actually somebody has to participate that truly understands your data.
yeah.
So it's a partnership to be able to get to the right place. A great guy of data governance is not going to be able to do a good job without your input on what's critical to your business. So it really is a partnership to get to the right answer, and each engagement has its own
And really,
own uniqueness.
and really setting those standards early on, depending on the organization, you'd be surprised of how many organizations I work with that don't have these data governance, data standards, security standards actually written down. They just there's no there's no internal type processes they've had over the years, and now AI, the dawn of AI, they're really understanding. Whoa, we need to really address this.
Yeah, any industry that has not been heavily regulated for confidential information had no reason to really go this route, right?
Mhm.
And so now there's just this large amount of companies that never had to really govern their data that are now faced with the idea of governing their data.
Yeah.
It's this whole new world that they've never had to really participate in to any real degree. And now they're with AI coming, and again, as security professionals, we know we're getting dragged down this road whether we like it or not. So now the
Mhm.
question is, let's prepare ourselves to get it. But let's to get to Steve's questions. I just want to make sure we try to get to all of them. I'm in the GRC space. We use ChatGPT, Teams, and are testing Copilot, but don't have E5 licenses, so no purview and things like that across the board. What are our options to mitigate the risk?
Yeah, so SAM would be the first thing. So E5, you don't have to have E5 to have SharePoint Advanced Management. That'd be the first thing. So if you have a Copilot license, as I mentioned, the SharePoint Advanced Management capabilities are free to you. If you don't have a Copilot license and you want to look at, you just want to get an overall health check of your SharePoint sites and permissionings, it is an add-on. There is a trial that you can use on there. So it's under the SharePoint Admin Center. So that is available to you regardless of like an E5 capability. When I state out E5, E5 gives you all of the, I would say 95% of all of the purview capabilities. It's not necessarily the SharePoint Advanced Management capabilities. There is, if you have an E3, there are bolt-ons, add-ons to that E3 that give you certain purview capabilities that you can have if you
But
if you
if
went
you
that
buy
route.
two, you might as well buy E3. I mean E5, right? So
Yeah,
that's kind of the model. If you're getting
yeah,
two add-ons, just go ahead and upgrade.
yeah, yeah. E5 gives you everything. I get the cost, but SharePoint Advanced Management is not if you have a Copilot, it's not an additional fee, I should say.
Yep. And so how can you restrict the graph not to leak the emails which are sensitive using Copilot?
Not leak the emails. Well, it's not going to leak them regardless. So, meaning when you say leak, you mean, I assume they mean leaking them internally to other people. Um,
Amar, can you elaborate that question a little bit more? And while you're typing, we'll move to the next one and circle back. The other question is, if our sensitivity button is grayed out in Word, is that a licensing insufficiency? I do have the Copilot license active and see it grayed out.
yeah, that is not a licensing issue. That's probably a configuration type a setting that's not been set up. So you'll have sensitivity, and so if it's grayed out, if you're in the Word document, actually click in the body of the document. If it's still grayed out, usually it's on by default, but if it's grayed out, then there's something that's configured either in the client itself through some policy or from the backend has it disabled.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have 7 minutes left. If you have any additional questions, feel free to shoot them now, so we can answer anything that you had curiosities of during the webinar. But if not, I'd just like to reiterate, one of the main takeaways here, until we get another question or if we get one, is data governance and data hygiene is what's going to allow you to adopt AI in a sensible, secure manner. And that's just something that needs to be said over and over again. When you're invited to a meeting with executives, data hygiene, data governance, we have to get that done before we bring in AI or else we expose to too much risk. So it really is kind of the drum beat of the security professional needs to sound a little bit like that, so that way the adoption of AI doesn't have negative consequences
Correct.
to the organization. So here's another question. So Copilot will fetch the data, email data on SharePoint OneDrive using the integration of Microsoft Graph. When you deploy integrate Copilot, in that case, can emails from other users or OneDrive be leaked?
No, not by that user. So for instance, if I was searching for another my peer internally, I wouldn't be able, I'm not going to be able to see their emails, their meetings, their Teams chats via Copilot. Even if I search for now, if I'm in a one-to-one chat or if I have an email with a person that's in my inbox, I could reference that in Copilot chat. But outside of that, that's not from my inbox, sent item, something like that. No, I wouldn't be able. Copilot doesn't have access to that. That's that user context.
Okay, and the other question is, what training or resources does Microsoft offer for advanced SharePoint? And I think that's a good point, right? So if you haven't been exposed to this whole governance thing, and then part of what you've said today, it's only been out for a year or
Yeah,
less.
yeah.
So there's just not that many people who know it. So what resources are out there available for somebody to get up to speed on this besides, hiring a third party?
Correct, yeah. So we do offer, depending on, we offer training courses, we offer, ability to get into SharePoint Advanced Management training. There's lots of public resources that we have out on our Learn sites and some of the tech blogs that will give you more information. So if you were to just go search, I don't have any at my fingertips, but SharePoint Advanced Management, if you just want to go search the web for that, or if you have Copilot. I'll tell you something else too. Um, AI is going to replace, Copilot is going to replace your current up-to-date web searching, web queries. I very rarely do any web searches anymore in Bing or Chrome, Google, or whatever it may be, because it is that assistant with you. It is more of that conversational piece. But there's lots of resources out there if you want to search for them around SharePoint Advanced Management. But we do offer it also. We offer it courses and training on it. And there are third-party entities that you can also get some of that SharePoint Advanced Management on.
No, there's only one third party entity that does that, though. You remember, we're doing this together. It's
That's
just
right.
us.
That's right.
So nobody
Rich.
else. Um, so that's covered all the questions. As always, we try to make these as valuable as possible to you. As you guys know, these aren't sales pitches. These are showing you, things that would be useful, showing, kind of cybersecurity, what needs to be done, future threats. So Doak, I'd really like to thank you. Now, one thing that, when Copilot first came out, having Microsoft really talk about the dangers of it was hard to do. And so Doak has been very gracious to sit here and just go, look, this is what's really happening. These are your exposure. This is your risk. Here's how we need to move forward in order to adopt this safely. And that's something that just, Copilot a year and a half ago, I mentioned that into a call and they almost hang up on me. So we appreciate you, Doak, for coming in and just being straightforward about how to approach this from a security perspective for those of us that are responsible of securing the data that the users want to be able to access through AI.
Yep.
Um, and we do
What
have 3 minutes. We got one more question. Go
I was
ahead,
going to
Joe.
say one last thing, if you don't mind. As we talked about, it's coming. AI is here. It's coming. So
Mhm.
do you want it? Do you want it to keep it in your boundary with Microsoft if you're already in a Microsoft shop? Do you want to keep AI in there, or do you want your end users? Because what we're finding is end users are leveraging and using third-party AI
Mhm.
solutions, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Gemini, whether it's Gronk, whether it's whatever. They're going to continue to build their components that integrate with our services. And then you're really at the mercy of that AI solution. With us, it's our AI solution. We have an end-to-end support structure. We have an end-to-end data governance structure and data security. Whereas if you're, say, leveraging ChatGPT with an agent in these areas, you're at the mercy of that. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I tell that to my clients all the time. With Copilot, Microsoft already has your data.
Yep, we already have
ChatGPT
it.
doesn't. So they're
Yes.
just right there. We can start from there and then move on
Yes.
to all the other reasons. I think Federico asked a great question. We talked about this in the back room before the webinar started. But yeah, he's asking about, hey, what about all these cool new agents?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
so agents is the newest thing. I would say it's not new for me, but it's new for our customers. Think of agents as more of a very unique purpose of something you want to do. So let's take, for instance, a lot of you on the call may be leveraging ServiceNow or Salesforce or Jira or other type of entities that have big databases and structure that you use. Agents are going to do a very particular, unique uh, type of AI solution, meaning, I have a ServiceNow database. My organization uses ServiceNow for ticketing systems, for internal knowledge, things like that. Well, ServiceNow even has their own first-party agent. It's already built out there. It's in the agent store, the app store. Salesforce has it. All of these other big entities are already building them and popping them up in our store to where it gives them it's an authentication piece, so they have to authenticate, but you're then going to be able to leverage and use Copilot within that other third-party entity. Well, we can take it a step further where we say, okay, we have these agents. Well, maybe we want to build a custom agent that's going to reference custom data that we have. We have this big database for, I don't know, customer information for whatever reason. And it's sitting out on the SaaS solution somewhere. And we're going to build this agent or build this component out that just has access to that information. And we get very granular with groups of users or people that have access to that Copilot instance. And then to take it even further, you're going to hear more about agents to agents. So Copilot or other agents talking to other agents, AI agents. So we have an agent that does X and it's talking to an agent that does Y, and they're interacting for different reasons. So more and more to come on that is agent to agent type, but just overall Copilot agents.
and I think Joey brings up a good point. We'll be wrapping this up because it's 3 p.m. We're definitely going to consider about doing a future webinar just about agents since it's new and probably very pertinent to a couple of our clients. But again, I'd like to thank everybody who spent the time here and suffered through Doak and myself talking about the Copilot and the AI and security. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact Ridge with anything that you have. Happy to answer it. If you need any help from us, just give us a ring. We're happy to help you. But I appreciate your time today, and you should be getting emails. We're going to have another webinar about SASE and security, kind of more global vision of how that market is trending with one of the vendors inside of that market. That'll be next month, so you'll be getting an invite for that. Hope to see you then. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.